today I want to give you maybe some tips for beginning reed making and what to kind of look out for when you're tying and when you're scraping and things that might make your life a little easier. Most of you, when you get cane, it's going to be gouge shaped and folded, like so. And you want to make sure that you soak the cane. And usually we soak it until it sinks, or at least 20 minutes in warm water. And it may sink to the bottom, it may not. Now, sometimes it'll show up and the ears right here will still be on it from the shaper tip. You want to remove those. So you could use your block and a razor blade. We'll remove the ears from the sides of the cane. You want to be careful, make sure it's straight if you can do it. And it doesn't take much, they'll come off fairly easy. But I'm trying to keep it straight with the shape of the end of the cane, just to get that off, because sometimes it interferes. It helps to take a little bit off the end here if you can. It helps when you're tying the reed. It's a smoother transition from the cane to the tube. That should be ready, and it's soaked, ready to be tied. But before we do that, I just want to talk about others who may be getting their cane pre-gouged. I know there are those that will score the cane because you need to fold it to fit it on the shaper tip. I don't score the cane. What I do is I make sure it's soaked. You can see the fibers are saturated. And I'll press, put my finger under the middle of it and press. This will help to keep it from cracking. Press it, and then as you press it, you fold it. Fold it over and keep it even if you can. You can see that's relatively strong gouge because it's resisting. And then press lightly and you have your folded cane. If it resists folding, then it's probably going to be alright. But if it folds very easily, then it probably is not going to work out. Now, you can see I have a lot of different shaper tips here, and I just wanted to emphasize that there are many, many shaper tips. This is a Gilbert one. This is somewhat of a wide tip. And then there's, let's say, this Prestini or Pizzoni. And this is very narrow tip. You notice that some tips are more parallel, other tips are more flared. And this will affect your reed a great deal. When you're shaping the cane, I use a sharp razor blade. And the reason is these edges need to be very sharp in the shaped cane. If you use a dull blade and these edges are ragged, your reed will leak. A leaking reed is a lot of trouble. What I do to get the cane to fit the shaper is I will remove a little bit from both sides, because my shape is a little more narrow between the ears and I have to do this to get it to fit. And then once that's ready to go, you can put it on your shaper, and you want this to be centered as best as possible. So we'll check it in the light to see that it's lined up in the middle, and it's not quite, so I will adjust this a bit until you get it centered fairly well. Make sure this is firm so that it's holding the cane really well, because you don't want the cane to move back and forth while you're shaping it. That's on there securely. So now let's shape the cane. You want a sharp razor blade. And the way I like to do it is I'll start at the bottom and just do little bits at a time, kind of shaving it away. And I work my way up. And you keep the blade flat. And then when you reach the top, do 1 or 2 clean passes down. Let's do the other side. Just a little at a time, so you can reach the shape, and then a couple clean passes. Now some people lean a little bit more, like so, and some people keep it flat. I think more flat is probably more true to the shape. But if you do lean it, it may give you a nice edge right in this area too, which is also good. It's sort of personal preference. Now we'll remove it, and like we did before, I'll take my block and I'm going to lose the ears. Ears are going to go, and I'm going to do it so you can see. Now I'm going to remove a little bit from the end, right from here. Kind of keep the blade almost flat. You don't want to have you don't want it to be like this. You want it to be almost flat to the cane. And you're just pushing, scraping the surface. And that looks pretty good right there. So we have our gouge-shaped piece of cane. Another aspect of tying reeds that I wanted to cover is being able to tie the reed so that you can use enough strength to close the reed and to keep the cane tight on the tube. And so what I use is a C-clamp, which is what this is. And I think this is a 4-inch C-clamp. And you can get these just about any hardware store, and they're only a few dollars. The only thing you got to watch out for is that this part will dig into the wood if you have a desk, and so that's why I use a steel plate. But these are real handy because you can pull without any worry, so long as it's attached to a desk or something solid. Some people use the back of a chair or be able to use a handle. The nice thing about the C-clamp is it's right there in front of you. Now there's a few things you're going to need before you tie the reed together. You're going to need a good ruler that you can see in millimeters. You're going to need a tube, a mandrel, and you're going to need some thread. I'm going to use this red thread. I also have some silk thread, and I have some other thread which is much thinner thread but strong. It's a good idea to use thread that's about 1/2 millimeter in thickness. Now this is FF gauge silk thread, and this is what we used to use a lot. Some threads that you use are more elastic than others, meaning when you pull the thread, they give quite a bit, whereas this thread doesn't give. I recommend that you use thread that's not elastic, that's very strong, and this will help you tie the reed better. When I tie it, I just do 3 granny knots here. Keep it kind of simple. And then I'll take some beeswax. What the beeswax does is it helps keep the thread from being too slippery, especially if it's nylon thread. I do it with silk thread as well. Now I also recommend that when you tie the reed, you use the spool to tie. This will help you to get enough strength when pulling. This is a very awkward thing to do, to tie a reed. You want to make sure that the mandrel goes through the tube to the very end, and that the tube is not too small. Now I will roughly place the cane where I think it's going to fit and then measure it. With this shape, I want the reed to tie at about 73. So we're right about 73 there at the end. That's a good place for you to be. Now some of you might have to make the tying a little shorter than that because you'll have a shape that may not fit on the tube when you tie it closed, or you might have to move it a little forward. So you're holding the cane on the tube, which is not an easy thing to do. It's rather awkward, and this is one of the things you'll have to get used to, is holding the cane on the tube like this, especially when you're putting the thread around. I'll do 2 turns around, because what this does is it helps you to hold the cane securely, and you don't have to worry about it flopping off. If you do just one, it's not quite enough to hold the cane. You need to do a couple of them. Now you can see that this side is closed, but this side is not. And we're going to try to even that out by using our nail on our thumb. Now I'm not pulling very tightly, but it is secure so that it doesn't flop around. with the right hand will loosen slightly, and then we're able to use our nail to move the cane so that it's even on the tube. Now I don't know if you can see, there's a tube in there. It's right, I can see where the end of the tube is. It's right up in here. Judging by the width of the thread, I've only got 3 turns to get this to close tightly. But I want to make sure it's even. That's more important. And I want to make sure that it's lined up with the oval. There must be a side slip. I don't know if you can see this well, but in this example, the bottom blade, which is under here, you can see that it slightly overlaps the top blade. This is called the side slip, and it does so against the turn of the thread. And this is very important that you have this, because if it's side slipped the other way, the thread will turn the blades around the tube, and you don't want that to happen. You want the blades to remain solid and stationary. And so we have this side slip where this bottom blade is slightly overlapping the top blade, and it should be on both sides. You want the reed to be straight as well. Sometimes the reed will be crooked. Let's make it crooked. All right, sometimes the reed will be crooked. So take the extra time to get this to line up evenly and all edges are flush. We'll do another one. And I know I have another wrap. Generally you want to be able to close the reed and then do a final wrap. And this is how a lot of players do that. Again, I'm not pulling overly tightly, but it's snug and all the sides are closed and they're even. The reed is straight. It's lined up well. And don't worry if it cracks, like this one's cracked a bit. That's not a problem. I'm just going to move the thread down to the bottom of the beginning of the thread and then turn it back. And then you've got your crossed thread right there. Now you can continue to go down the reed. This is a guide right here. This string right there is a guide. This will guide you as you're tying the reed, and it will force the thread to stay close to the previous turn. Now it depends on how thick the thread is. You may go 19 turns, or you may do 25. I mean, it just depends on the thickness of the thread. But when you get to the bottom where you have about 3 left, then I will hold this with my 2 fingers here. This can be awkward because you're doing a couple things with your left hand, and you hold it tightly, and then you release the thread so you have slack. This is probably one of the more difficult things to do. But you're going to do a half hitch, and what that means is you're going to take the bottom portion of the thread and turn it over the top. So you're just making a loop like so. And then you take that loop and you put it over the top. While you're holding, hopefully holding tightly enough, you don't want to loosen this up or let it go. And then you pull this extended thread, pull it quickly, and you've made your knot. Now the thread is secure. So let me show you again this half hitch, because it can be tricky. You're just flipping it over. That's all you're doing. Flipping it over. And then loop it over the top of the reed. Pull tight. I do 3 of these. There you go. So now there's our tied reed. We're going to release it. I'll take my knife, and you be careful when you do this. And all you got to do is turn the knife up, and your reed is free. Now we can take it off the mandrel, and we can look down, look into the tube through the light, and you will see that the tube intersects the edges of the reed. And it does. Now what I'll do further, after this is tied, I will sand the ears off. and try to make them even with the shape. Now this is my shape, which is the EV tip, which is just a beautiful shape. Not only sounds beautiful, but it functions really well. So there you have your tied reed, and it looks straight and even. So we're going to scrape the reed. I have a bunch of knives here, and it's difficult to find good reed knives that are reasonably priced because they tend to be on the expensive side. And this is the most recent copy of that knife. You can see it's a little different style. The blade is much thinner at the end. When you use a knife that the steel is very thin, scraping the reed, it tends to chatter. When the cane is hard, it will leave chatter marks in the reed, and that's something you want to avoid. There's another knife that I found online, and the steel it's very thin and it chatters quite a bit. These knives are great, the thin steel, for finishing the reed, but starting the reed, they're not so good. Oftentimes I'll use a beveled edge, which this is, and when you're scraping the reed, there's very little chatter. It's very smooth. Here's another knife that has a beveled edge. You can see, very strong. Goes through the cane really well. So the beveled is a good knife, but not a great finishing knife. I tend to opt for the Vitry style, which I can get a little bit of both. I use two knives when I make reeds, is basically what I'm saying. I use a heavier gauge knife to remove the bark, and then I'll use a finer blade to do the finishing work. Now here's a knife that's from Nielsen, and this is fairly ubiquitous, as you can find it anywhere. It's more of a wedge style, and this is a good knife for both aspects of making reeds. Now when sharpening the knife, I find that the easiest way to do this is by using a diamond stone and a ceramic stone. And the beauty of these stones is that you don't need to use any type of lubricant. You just use them dry. And that's great because it's less mess. There are water stones. I've used water stones like this and like this, but you have to soak them in water. It takes a while, and it's a bit messy. They do give you a good edge, but they take a lot of time. And this is a Dia-Sharp fine, and this is a Spyderco, a ceramic, extra fine. Between the two of them, works very well. When you have a brand new knife, just use an ultra fine stone, because new knives already have a nice edge on them. I will just do a few passes each way, circular motions, trying to feel for the burr. Takes very little off. I tested it on the nail. It's very sharp. But sometimes you have to figure out where that burr is. And if you go too high, you may miss it. If you go too low, you may miss it. You might have to do this a few times with the different, I do about 15, 20 degrees, raising the knife just to get that burr. Now you'll come to a point where that burr will cease to exist, and then you'll have to use a more strong grit to get the burr back. And it's a similar motion. Not a lot of pressure. Just circular motions. That's all. And when you scrape the reed, you'll know immediately if you have it or not. And that's nice and sharp. You don't need to spend a lot of money on a knife to get a good knife to work for you. But you do need to have a sharp knife. Another product that I've used in the past that's worked really well for me are the ceramic sticks. And in there you can see there's a couple ceramic sticks on a number of different knives. And you just do a few passes. And it gets you really a razor sharp knife. Now to do the rough scrape, you can measure the reed. We want it to start at about 66, the tip. We're going to remove the cane within that region. Now I've just removed the bark. There's my edge. And try to get rid of, if you get any chatter, you want to scrape through it. I'm holding my knife so that it's resting against underneath the nail. And this is why you don't want to use a really big knife, because you want to be close to the work, or reasonably close. These initial scrapes are meant to be long scrapes. Not really short scrapes, but long scrapes. Smooth, without chatter, and scraping everything off the end. When you look at it through the light, you can see what you've scraped. And the reed is really divided into thirds in a way. So we have the thread, the middle part, and then the tip part. It's a fairly good way to do it. Now, as soon as you can get your plaque through the side and through the top, then cut through the top with the plaque. And then remeasure. I'm not really using a lot of pressure. I'm just removing cane incrementally, and we're going to start, now that we've had this long scrape, we're going to start from the end and move back. And what we want is the reed to vibrate. We want to get this reed to vibrate, at least the tip. And that's what we have. And you can see it's thinning out. So now I have it vibrating. I think I'm going to scrape down the channels. I call them channels anyway. And scrape through toward the tip. And we're doing like, I don't know, 9, 10, anywhere between 8 and 15 is probably okay. I'm not bearing down too much, but I am removing all the bark and the shell, and we're getting right to the wood. And that's what we have for so far. We have a nice crow, which was an early sign of a good reed. And I think I might do a little bit more with the tip. This is generalized scraping. This isn't too detailed. The tip is fairly long. And we're kind of putting some definition into the tip, a little bit where it begins. Not a lot of refinement, we're just removing cane where we have it laid out to be. And we'll remeasure to make sure we're where we should be, and yeah, that's fairly close. And now we have the beginnings of a rough scrape. Make sure too that your cane is well soaked. That's a good sign. Now, I'm going to remove the rest of the bark. But I'm not digging in too much. I'm just kind of giving it its contour. You can see that the reed is cracked, but hasn't gone all the way through. It's mostly the bark. And that's okay. we're going to try to clip this to get it as close to 70 as we can. And when I clip the reed using the block, it's kind of a rolling action, right? You kind of roll the knife across the surface, and we should have it there. It's about 71. Well, that almost crows the right notes. It's a little long, but that's okay. I'm going to scrape the very tip, the very end, and work my way back. If you can get the reed this far, you've accomplished quite a bit, actually. You got the reed to vibrate, it's not leaking, you tied it well, it's straight, you have a decent shape. And what I'm looking for when I'm doing this is not so much the way it clicks off of the end, but just that there's a nice smooth approach to the plaque. Not digging in, just turning the wrist to get the knife to cut. Oh, I took a little bit off there. I find that this helps a lot with cane that you probably get, which is usually a little weaker. And this is a good way to approach it. And we'll see what we have. Very flabby, but it vibrates, and that's a plus. Let me trim it because it's not quite. So I'm having difficulty to see here. Let's see. I want it to be at about a C. I'm going to do this off camera because I can't see. Not quite a C. That's very close. You could probably get away with it. It's not bad, not horrible. It does play, sort of plays the pitch. Now I'm going to show you something that may help in your reed making when you get a reed to this point. And that is, sometimes with the cane that you get, it's very soft cane, and it doesn't want to hold pitch very well, and it's somewhat unstable. This is the best way I know to approach it. Once you've thinned the tip, and we've gotten everything to vibrate well, what you can do is turn the knife at a fairly strong angle. And scrape towards the corner, but you've got to be careful not to press. You need a sharp knife for this. This will give you stability in the reed. And so that it holds pitch and is easy to play while still responding well. And look at that angle of that knife, right? We're really getting into this. I can tell that just by looking at the reed, it tends to flatten out, so we know it's a bit softer. A little soft cane there. Alright, so this is what we have. Another tip, when you're doing the final clipping, use a razor blade. Be very careful when you do this, because razor blades are quite dangerous. They're very sharp, but you will get a really nice clip at the end of the reed. You want to get a very, very little very fine cut. This reed is going to work just fine. It's light, it's easy to play. Of course, you'll have to figure out how far to go in these regions. So those are some of the tips that I think will help you in your journey of reed making. And it's a good idea to, establish some consistency this way. And that way you'll be able to evaluate the reed as you're making it. I hope these tips help you out. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.